thumbs up, come and join the fight from wherever you live, or come and I welcome scholars and researchers to come here to France to my Peace Institute and study and research and get involved. This is a serious project, what I'm proposing. What I'm saying in a nutshell is that these problems are so critical. If you've understood what I'm saying, it's pretty critical, this stuff. That no tinkering around, small stuff response is going to be good enough. Because the juggernaut of lies, and I've mentioned the backlog of lies, I've taken us back to the time of Tiberius, it is the same lie juggernaut, right, is now so advanced that the planet itself is in danger. Not just Britain, the planet's in danger. When this level of lying gets permitted, the planet's in danger. And I'm speaking as European Coordinator for the World Intellectual Forum, which is an international body of intellectuals trying to come to emergency assistance to save this planet. We even have a thing called WMAS, the World Messiahship Avatar and Seishant Council, which is like a gathering of messiahs from all over, every culture, Hindu, Buddhist, Zoroastrian, whatever, to come together and try and save this planet. That's what we're doing, on the ethereal and real levels. I just got back from Delhi, where we were meeting in India. So what I'm saying now is not just my own, little proposals. It's a backed, emerging consensus of what I think needs to happen. And I'm looking particularly at the UK, although obviously my interests are much bigger, and I will come to those bigger concerns at the end of the talk, because I'm interested also in the Middle East and what's going on in the peace proposals in the Middle East, and what we can do to increase the truth content of them. So I'm proposing, I'm talking about the UK now, what we need to do, and by the way, these ideas could be adapted and adopted to other cultures. The planetary crisis and the truth deficit is so vast that if democracy is to survive, as I believe it can and must, then we have to make our constitutions much more robust and impermeable to attack. One of the problems with liberalism, Beveridge style, Webb style, whatever, Keynes style, is that it's subject to attack by illiberal forces who have a sort of inbuilt vested interest in proving it wrong. So the Ivan the Terribles that are lurking out there in history, they haven't gone away. They just reincarnate into new bodies and carry on doing their mischief, it seems to me. So the attack on liberalism is ferocious, and it's come from both American sources that have infiltrated inside the US. Trump has not a democratic, concept in his body. He's a totalitarian dictator, masking as some kind of a democrat. And the same with some of the Russian forces, it would appear. So how do we make the British Constitution, say the UK Constitution, robust enough to withstand illiberal forces? And, don't get me started on Saudi Arabia, which is about as illiberal a society as you can possibly imagine, which cuts up journalists, by telephone instructions, or Netanyahu's kind of fake Zionist Israel. It's not authentic Israel, what he's doing. It's a racist nightmare, a sort of nationalist, geopolitical abuse of power against small, against the Christ people, the Palestinians. Same old, So I'll come back to that point at the end. What do we do to make the UK Constitution robust enough to stick up for itself and to help other people? We have to increase its truth content. Obviously, that's what I'm saying. The first thing, therefore, is we have to pass a duty of veracity bill for all parliamentarians. well, hang on, Thomas, you can't do that because corrupt liars are in charge. They're not going to pass that bill. Okay, that is a problem. So at least you have to get it on the agenda of progressive reform parties, like everyone that isn't, a right-wing Tory or UKIP or Brexit kind of person, and who actually remember what the word truth is and what it sounds like. Parties that stand for truth put it on the agenda. The next point is that a large element are now calling for outright Scottish independence. One of the huge implications of the last 3 years of turmoil over Brexit is that the Scots didn't vote for for Brexit, and they are now saying, I think justifiably, that that there's been a material change in Europe and Britain, because the Europe that people voted to remain part of in the referendum in 2014 no longer exists, and therefore they're calling for a second referendum on Scottish independence. I listened very carefully to Nicola Sturgeon's speech the other day, and she is playing it very carefully and sensibly. What she's asking is for a Scottish Constitutional Convention should be formed. She's saying that all Scottish MPs, all Scottish ex-MEPs, all Scottish council leaders of all parties should come together and discuss the best way forward for Scottish independence. Build a momentum, sound out the people of Scotland. And I believe there is now a majority. The polls back this. The polls back the fact that there is a majority of Scottish independence. What I'm proposing, founding a constitutional reform initiative, what I'm calling it is CRI, C-R-I, as an initiative of my institute. The Constitutional Reform Initiative recognises that in parallel to constitutional discussions in Scotland, which will be happening in the coming weeks and months, there have to be similar discussions in Northern Ireland, Wales and England. On a national basis, we need a constitutional reform initiative. And that's why I'm glad to see Sir Keir Starmer come out and say, if he's Labour leader, he will back that. We need a constitutional reform initiative. And some of the things that I'm going to propose, he's already said he would back, like proportional representation. So what I'm saying is the Constitutional Convention should be a national-wide thing. The Scottish Constitutional Convention should go ahead, and there should be a similar one set up for the rest of the UK. And they should work in parallel. We should work out a blueprint fraternally and constructively as to what is going to happen in the future of the UK. As far as I'm concerned, Parliament has lost its authority now to represent the UK. It's taken a policy decision to implement this so-called Brexit on fake, false, deceitful and mendacious grounds. It's captured hegemony over the media and the minds of people so that they think this is right. This is called the Stockholm Syndrome, when you go along with what the abuser's doing because, well, that's the only voice you know, right? So I think that the National UK Constitutional Convention should endorse and support the Scottish Constitutional Convention. And if they say they want a second referendum after due consideration and looking into the legal aspects of this in depth, I think there's a huge legal case to be made that when Scotland joined the two parliaments together in 1707, I think it was, I always forget the date, it was done by the premiership of Robert Harley, the Earl of Oxford. And Oxford, who was a friend at the time of John Toland, a great savant and druid and interesting man, intellectual, who was a friend of Leibniz and Locke. Harley said, we bought the Scots. He was absolutely fair, and he admitted we bribed enough people in the Scottish Parliament to shut it down and make them come to Westminster. Research this, these are facts. And the Scottish people are not stupid. It's been an experiment for about 300 years. It's had its ups and downs, but I think they've realised that it's not working anymore. Scotland has its own path and its own destiny, and I lived there for 7 years. It's some of the happiest and most difficult times of my life, because when I moved to Scotland, I had no idea it was actually a separate country. I thought it was like just part of my country. Scotland actually is another country to England, and I didn't realise that. It was a real awakening for 7 years, and that's why I'm saying what I'm saying now, because most people south of the border really don't understand this. Boris Johnson and his Tories literally haven't got a clue about Scotland. So I think, yes, we have to support the Scottish Constitutional Convention, I think, and there has to be a parallel one set up for the rest of the country. Maybe we need one separately in Northern Ireland. I think they should have their own. But I think England and Wales can have one. And it'd be very interesting to see what they all come up with. I think the Scots are going to go for independence and a second referendum. That's my prediction. And I don't think the English and Welsh should stop them. I don't think there's a moral or a legal case. The legal case for the right of Scotland to secede is that it never disavowed its separate nationhood. It never surrendered sovereignty. It loaned it to a shared parliament for a time. And although the Scots were bought, as Harley put it, their souls weren't bought. Souls aren't for sale. And the Scottish soul is still free and sovereign. They realise that. Enough of them realise that now. And there's no way that, the English can't buy them again. I mean, that's enough, They like Europe. A lot of Scots like Europe so much they come and live in Europe. I suppose I'm an honorary Scot who's gone into exile. I feel like some old Jacobite, There were an awful lot of very clever Jacobites, like Chevalier Ramsay, who's one of my heroes, who went into exile rather than stick with the corrupt regime that was running Westminster. Tolan was interesting. He was Irish, and he knew Europe very well. Okay, so the second point I want to make is that a very large element are also calling still for a second referendum in the UK as a whole on the EU membership. I think that once the facts come out about the illegality and inadmissibility of that 2016 referendum, then I think it is inevitable. It should be annulled. And I would put this to a constitutional convention. I'd say, look, this entire crisis has happened because we had a catastrophe, an intelligence meltdown, a moral meltdown, and we are where we are. We're about to break up as a country. We've really annoyed the Scots. They're not for sale. There's no way around this apart from a second EU referendum. This time, put all the facts, disallow any foreign manipulation. If necessary, shut Facebook down for the duration of the referendum. I mean, that can be done technically, because that's the tool they're using to manipulate people. And and have a panel of genuine, liberal, independent, intellectually advanced people advising BBC policy. There needs to be a new think tank. I noticed it's very interesting. Facebook has just appointed a guy called Thomas Hughes to run their complaints division, because Facebook, you can get chucked off for saying boo to a goose, and there's no robust system of double checking stuff. So they've now appointed this guy Thomas Hughes, who used to be involved with Article 19, which is a group set up by Professor Boyle of Essex University, who was a colleague of mine when I was setting up my institute. Boyle is a great man, I think he's still around, who set up Article 19, and this guy Thomas Hughes is someone who worked with him. And they stand for freedom of information and no censorship. So they believe Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is the underpinning and guarantor of the right of free speech, which is what I'm doing now. I'm only here because of Article 19. Well, Thomas Hughes is going to do that for Facebook. Good luck, sir. What we need is someone to do that for the BBC. We need a Thomas Hughes or someone in charge of, or with oversight of, BBC strategic policy setting, because that's where the catastrophic moral meltdown happened. We had idiots like that woman on the Moral Maze who became a Brexit fanatic, seizing control of the BBC. And poor old Jeremy Paxman, who was a member of my family and a good friend of my mother, he resigned around that time, and that was a bit of a tragedy because at least he was an intelligent voice in the BBC. We need the debate, and the BBC is so important. It has to have, like a Thomas Hughes, monitoring it for its genuine, independent and intelligent guarantor of freedom of speech throughout the whole country. And I think that the Constitutional Convention would, in all parts of the UK, say we need a second Brexit referendum. I don't think I don't think it can be contested. Let that conversation happen. My next point, number 3, and I'm just proposing. I mean, I'm just one voice. I'm just an academic and a philosopher and a druid. I have no status apart from my truth sword, apart from my power of truth speaking, apart from my Christianity and my faith, and my 40 years of study and scholarship and my various hats. That's all I have. But I think that the Privy Council has let us very badly down, as I said. The actions of the Privy Council have proven unable to prevent the catastrophe that is Brexit. And some elements within it may indeed have even colluded in bringing it about. I've tried to get information out about the Privy Council, and you're always told when you write to them that everything they do is secret. That it's not governed by freedom of information legislation. You can't know anything about it. And the Chilcot Commission was set up under it. So no terms of reference were ever published, no explanations of why they took such a limited view of their mission, because it's Privy Council. Well, I'm sorry, that's not good enough, folks. The Privy Council has become far too powerful and secretive in the modern British state. I would say Brexit is a catastrophic failure of the Privy Council. And I'm saying its working should now be made subject to A, freedom of information inquiries, B, televised. It's a public body paid for by you and me and taxpayers, and it's made up of the great and the good, but also the great and the evil, and the wicked and the evil. And we need to be able to see on TV and listen to the debates so we can work out who's who. And we have to help the Queen, because the poor thing sits there. I think she chairs the crucial meetings. The poor Queen doesn't seem to have, been able to work out good from evil for quite a while. And she's listening to all these, big sounding professors and this lord, that, and whatever. She doesn't know who's telling the truth. I've said this before, but, the great King of Ireland had a cup which used to shatter when lies were told. It needs to go into the Privy Council. And it's, the truth cup. So, yes, and also, a duty of veracity oath covering the Privy Council and televise it, just like Parliament. What? Yeah, it's a revolution, folks. This is a huge constitutional shift. But it's the only way to save our country for democracy. You see, when any philosopher is asked how you save a given city or country or whatever, you bring back truth. It's the first thing. Why on earth, if it doesn't have that, it's not worth saving? That's what those poor Democrats are fighting so hard to get evidence and stuff in the impeachment trial of Trump, and they've lost a skirmish. They mustn't lose the war because they must take it to another court, the Supreme Court. They must think this through very carefully. They must take it ultimately to the court of the American people, and somebody should leak the evidence. I don't know, I kind of sometimes wish I was a professor of law. I'm merely a druid, but we actually think through the laws in the beginning. So the Privy Council needs a revolution, or just abolish it. And I don't think that's a good idea. I'm sure it does some good stuff. Let it carry on, but under the terms I'm suggesting. That's a constitutional reform. There is a thing in France I've discovered which is very interesting. There's what's called a constitutional court, and it doesn't exist in the UK. And this is not the Supreme Court, it's different. The Constitutional Court is made up of all the former prime ministers and presidents of France and other very great statesmen and women. And it decides whether legislation that's going through Parliament in France is constitutional or not. And issues can be referred to it. And it makes a judgment. And it has the accumulated wisdom of all the Chiracs and the Mitterrands and whoever's still left alive. I think as a separate thing or parallel to or part of the Privy Council, I don't care. We need a constitutional court in the UK if we're going to survive. Because the conflicts arising between Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and within those countries are only going to get worse. So that's my parallel proposal. Then there's the question of the monarchy. Okay, the Queen, who I have had a few little dealings with, who I received my degree from her daughter, Princess Anne, who I've always greatly respected. And I've met her husband, Prince Philip, who I've also greatly respected. I've always been a fan of his mother, Princess Alice of Greece, who was an amazing woman and a mystic, really, and set up an order of nuns. She's buried outside the Golden Gate in Jerusalem in the Church of Mary Magdalene. So, I'm a great fan of the whole tradition of the monarchy, but as a constitutional monarchy, right? I'm with Locke and the Glorious Revolution. We can't go back to an absolute monarchy. And I'm just a bit concerned, and I'm a great fan of Prince Charles, who is going to hopefully become the next king. I know there are voices in the Murdoch press saying he should be skipped. Well, I think that's scurrilous and outrageous. Charles is a very great philosopher in his own right, and an environmentalist and an activist. And he's a great lover of heritage and architecture, and I'm sure he'll make a very good king. And I think also his interest in faith is very interesting. As an interfaith person, our paths have crossed a little, Charles and mine, and I have a great respect for his knowledge of comparative religion. His book Harmony is on my shelf here, and I had some tiny little role in helping advise it. So, but to save the monarchy, the monarchy is not looking good at the moment, because I think the Queen has been pretty shown up by Brexit to be impotent and ineffectual, if not colluding in it. I'm sorry, madam, but if this is your baby and you think Brexit is a good idea, then we're on totally opposite sides of the equation here. And I think you're completely misadvised and haven't thought this through. I also think that, if it's just because the Queen has huge financial vested interests and wants, the offshoring to carry on and all her aristocratic cronies are all up to the same game, well, then I think it's shocking. And this isn't acceptable to the British people and public as a whole. That's millions of us, ma'am. And I'm afraid, you may be monarch, but it's just not dharmic. And this is the point at which, change is needed. So what I would say is a slimming down of the monarchy, a putting its financial affairs in public, a total transformation of the way things are done, and a real, more like a Danish model, more bicycles, trips around town, fewer kind of palaces and horse racing, and just a rethinking of what is the role of the monarchy. The monarchy should be a linchpin of a constitutional democracy, a constitutional monarchy and a constitutional democracy. It should be knowing there's a good person up there in charge who can stop tyrants and evil people coming into power. When I worked at an all-girls Anglican school in Caen, our head of politics, who was a great teacher, a friend of mine, used to say the most important thing about the monarchy is not that it has any power, really, in itself, but that it, by having the little bit of power it does, it prevents evil people taking that power. It sits there and can stop tyrants taking over. Well, unfortunately, you see, that model is broken down because the evil people have taken over and brainwashed everybody into thinking, that's great, cheer. Just like Caesar marching into town and the mob cheers. So I think we need a written constitution now which limits the power of the monarch in writing. It sets out clearly the rights and duties of all parts of the modern UK. And it gives all citizens equal rights of access to information, education, justice, human rights, peace, and cultural and economic opportunities. Another problem I have with the way the monarchy currently sees its role is it seems to think it's a branch of the MOD. The monarchy seems to think that it's the military industrial complex. It's involved with arms sales and arms investment and research and development into weapons. It's involved in war fighting and so on. Now this isn't what monarchs are for. I mean, I know it's a long argument and it goes back to the discussion between Samuel, Saul and David. But I'm afraid I'm with Samuel. It's time to stop the wars on this planet. We can't afford a World War III. And this British monarchy has gone AWOL. It thinks its role is to get ready for World War III. And it thinks it's the commander-in-chief and that the military is the best thing. With all due respect, that is just so wrong. It's as stupid as Canute trying to stop the waves. The monarchy's primary duty is to guarantee peace. We talk about the Queen's peace, not the Queen's war. We need to spend as much on peace creation and peace development in foreign policy and domestic policy as we do on military policy. The lie and this is going back to the truth deficit about the British nation and what we are for, you'd think it was a war machine. And it's weird living here in France and seeing the 100 Years' War through the French eyes. It's like this is a really evil war machine, this British state. It's been going since God knows when, 1400, well, no earlier, 1300s. And so, totally transforming that understanding of the monarchy and putting it in writing. The duty of the monarch is to guarantee the peace. That is actually the coronation oath that they have to swear to guarantee frith, which is peace in Anglo-Saxon. Okay, so yeah, and that's all very important. I don't think Scotland is ready to compromise on this, and I don't think the rest of the UK is. If we actually get together and think this through. The other thing that has to be fixed is the question of Northern Ireland. People of Northern Ireland didn't vote for Brexit. It's been forced on them. There's a lot of very unhappy people in Northern Ireland at the moment, and I'm chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Britain and Ireland, and I'm very unhappy about this. Good Friday Agreement is really, really important. I played a little tiny minor role in that. Tony Blair, played a huge role, and Mo Molam an even bigger role. It's very, very important that the people of Northern Ireland are given a referendum under that as to whether they want to just meekly accept this Johnson Brexit nightmare or whether they'd rather join the Republic of Ireland in one country again and stay in the EU. It's as simple as that. That's their legal right, and the moderate, democratic, progressive political parties of Ireland are calling for that. And as part of a constitutional convention for Northern Ireland, that would be what's on the agenda. I can't see any single argument that even the most extreme unionists could possibly come up to counter at least the holding of a referendum. It's actually legally binding under the Good Friday Agreement, and it's morally binding on the hearts of us all, not just in Northern Ireland but throughout the whole country. I don't know what I would vote for. I think if I was Northern Irish and had a vote in that referendum, and I think, by the way, it should only be Northern Ireland people get to vote in that, or all people living in Northern Ireland, including people from abroad or whatever, then I think all the evidence is they would vote to rejoin the Republic. And I think that's destiny. Let them, I really don't think it's time to start marching on the streets and Protestant paramilitaries start blowing up Catholic neighbourhoods again. We mustn't go down that route. Brexit has forced this project of Irish reunification, and I'm a great fan of Maud Gonne and Sean McBride, and who was a great peace thinker in Ireland. And I've worked with the Irish Free University in Dublin. I've lectured there. I've known a lot of people involved in peace studies in Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. My good friend Sean English is one of my closest colleagues over there, and I think it's time for that process to start. So a Northern Ireland Constitutional Convention followed by a referendum. I don't think England, Westminster, Wales and England, whatever you want to call it, has the right, either morally or legally, to prevent that. It just doesn't. I mean, and even if the Protestant groups in Belfast and Ireland say, oh, sell out, betrayal, and start marching and arming, I'm afraid that, that should be nipped in the bud, and we should go to the desk and the lecture room and the seminar hall. This should be debated in Queen's University in Belfast, in Derry, in all the universities of Ireland, and the South, because maybe the South doesn't want the North to rejoin. I think they do by their constitution, although there's discussion about that. But I believe that I think it would be very interesting to see that discussion happen. So that's democracy, right? That's discussion. So a referendum on the reunification of Ireland and its rejoining the European Union automatically. You see, when Germany was reunited, East Germany automatically joined the EU. It would be the same with Ireland, Northern Ireland. Now, of course, they might lose. I mean, maybe the people of Northern Ireland are going to love Brexit and Johnson so much they'll want to stay part of Little Britain. I personally don't see that happening. In my Encyclopedia of Druid Studies that's nearing completion, there's an awful lot of Irish voices that seem to believe in justice and truth all the way back, right into the earliest times. And I don't think that the truth deficit that I've talked about is as grave in the Irish soul as it is in the English soul. I think something weird's happened to the English. Corruption at a soul level. It's very interesting. Rudolf Steiner gave some great lectures towards the end of his life in Wales on Druids and truth. And there's for those that are clairvoyant and mystics, watch the truth quotient of Ireland, and I think it's going to flicker into a stronger, brighter flame because, as I said at the beginning of this talk, this is Bridget's day. She's the saint that will supervise that coming together of Ireland, which is ultimately a project of love. What to me Brexit is a project of hate. So the Irish people ultimately stand for love. That's why they embraced Christianity, but they didn't do it in a stupid way. They kept their Druid wisdom. That's why Columba went off and brought Irish Christianity to Scotland, and St. Columbanus came to Italy and Bobbio and founded amazing libraries. One of his disciples, St. Gall, went to Switzerland. It's now the best monastic library in Europe. I mean, if I ever become a monk, I think I'll